Alrighty, welcome back. Welcome back. Our break is now coming to an end. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speakers, Bill Macaitis, who brings with him 5 successful exits as the former CMO and CRO of Slack, CMO of Zendesk, and SVP of Marketing at Salesforce, as well as Zach Sims, who's the co-founder and CEO of Codecademy and is a venture partner here with us at Bowery Capital. And they'll be giving us the full scoop on bottoms-up marketing. Zach, over to you.
Awesome. All right. Welcome, everyone. Excited to be here today speaking with Bill. So I think maybe while we start, might just be helpful to dive into some of the context on the two of us. Bill, I know you and I talked a little bit about your background at Slack, but maybe useful to just kind of take everyone through the journey of Slack and kind of where you started and where you ended up, and then we can dive into some of these other topics.
Yeah, sure. Super excited to be here, guys. Quick background on myself. I did about 10 years on the B2C side, working with large media companies, did a couple startups, and then I moved over to the B2B side. So that was everything from Salesforce, went to Zendesk as their CMO, took them through an IPO. And then most recently with Slack, where I was kind of an early employee, around employee number 50, and then had more of a CRO type role. So that was marketing, sales, success, and support. And now I do full-time independent board member work or board advisory work for aspiring unicorns and decacorns.
Awesome. I know you and I were talking the other day and kind of reminiscing about maybe the parallels. I think in your career you started in consumer, as you mentioned, and then moved your way into enterprise. I think by way of a quick introduction on me for everyone, I started Codecademy about 9 years ago. We teach more than 45 million people around the world technology skills and help them find jobs. And we are on the same journey that Bill's career has taken. So we started as a pure direct-to-consumer product with a free product available to those tens of millions of people that I mentioned. About 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago, we introduced a paid freemium offering called Codecademy Pro that's $40 a month, and at this point has hundreds of thousands of subscribers. And so a lot of experience with kind of consumer freemium. And then more recently, been working on a product called Codecademy for Business, where we take that same Codecademy Pro product and sell it to companies, most of which are inbound. And I think we, commonality is that we do not have a top-down sales team. And I know this is obviously something that you did a lot of work on at Slack, Bill. So maybe we could just start with what is bottoms-up marketing and kind of what you saw at Slack.
Yeah, it's a fun question, right? Because I think those of us that have kind of had the B2C background, like we've always been marketing to users directly. But if you kind of take a step back and historical B2B, even enterprise selling of software, the old model was you would hire a big outbound field sales team, cold call, go in through the CIO from the top. They had to buy the software. They were the gatekeeper. Everything was installed on giant servers and had updates, and that was the only path. And then SaaS comes around, and wow, now you can market and sell directly to individual end users. And I think that just opened up an entirely new playbook, right? Because there's so many different ways to grow a company. But kind of that older model of the top-down selling is just, A, it's hard, it takes long deal cycles, and B, it's expensive, right? Like, outbound AE, really good enterprise salespeople are really expensive, and if your entire model is built on that, it just can really slow down your growth. So I think this idea of like bottoms-up marketing, has a lot of different names. In some cases, people call it seed and grow, land and expand. But the basic idea is that you market directly to these end business users, and you get a pocket of adoption, right? And for Slack, for example, IBM is like 400,000 people. We started with a tiny little team, and then it grew to 2 teams and 3 teams and 5 teams and slowly grew. And you'll see a lot of other companies in the SaaS space that have kind of adopted this playbook. And there's a lot of advantages to it, but at its basics core, that is kind of the concept.
Do you see it as as an either or over time, was it that Slack started with the bottoms up marketing and then moved to a more top down model over time?
I think I think the really successful companies start with it, but eventually you can combine both together, right? Because what happens is when you really start to move up market, you're not just going through an individual end user anymore. When you're talking about getting a wall-to-wall deal, you have to go through legal and finance and procurement and infosec and all these teams that have absolutely a bunch of other things to do and don't want to do anything with you. You have to get them on your side. And they have a lot of questions too, right? It's hard to do this high velocity, perfect nirvana state where no one actually talks to someone because they have questions and problems and you need people to help facilitate that. So I think in an ideal world, at least in my experience across Zendesk and Salesforce and Slack, it's so much easier to get a big deal through if you already have pockets of usage because you have internal champions. They already have some proof points of how well it's working. And you can leverage that to help overcome all these other obstacles that you're going to get. And salespeople, you do need them for that, right? There's definitely a role. So I think in a great way, they can kind of work together.
What ended up being like that key differentiator for Slack early on that enabled it to get the consumer success or like individual success that allowed for bottoms up marketing? Because it obviously sounds super easy for anyone to get distribution with millions of people and then upsell into the organizations. Obviously Slack did something unique. And so how did that happen, and how would you have people think about kind of creating their own groundswell of interest in order to start executing bottoms up?
I think it's interesting. Like, I'm doing this a long time, and I'm a big net promoter score guy. So I love looking scoring that and seeing how you compare to benchmarks, but also ask the why question. So NPS is how like you'd recommend to a friend or colleague, and then you can ask why, right? And so I spent a lot of time kind of like mining the why. Like why are people signing up for Zendesk or Slack or all these other ones? And what's really interesting is usually the number one reason for both those companies and for other companies I advise or work with is it's simple and easy to use. Like that is such a big one. And it's very contrarian, like enterprise selling or marketing. A lot of times when you start building it out, your natural temptation is I want to add feature after feature after feature after feature. Because the old way was like you'd send out an RFP and they go, oh, I need all these features. And so you just add dozens of features. And I call it like the Photoshop effect. For anyone that used to use Photoshop, I would try to dabble in that, and that would be like I just want to like crop a photo and it would be hidden under 17 filters and drop, and I couldn't even like do the most basic thing anymore because it becomes so complex, right? And so I think like just having simple, easy to use is a big part of Slack's success because collaboration has been around for a long time. The other thing that I think kind of ties into both our backgrounds with the B2C is like people want to have a little fun, right? It's enterprise software historically is really boring. It is the most boring, stale, lifeless, sterile environment, right? When you go into the software, it's a white background, black text, everything is okay except next, cancel. And I think at Slack, at least for us, we tried to infuse a little personality in there. So a little bit of like, the colors were different. It was kind of a bold tartan plaid, type scheme. It was a different editorial tone and voice. The loading message of the day for those that use Slack, like, as the app loads up, you get a little loading message a day. That could have easily been the Microsoft Hourglass just spinning for 15 seconds. I said, let's have some fun here, right? Yeah. Have some fun, right? It's really interesting too, like of all the integrations that Slack had, because, as we started integrating them like Macaitis and Salesforce and HubSpot and and occasionally we'd have this report that would go like, well, what are the most used integrations at Slack? And it was always the number one was Giphy, right? It wasn't these complex business integrations. It was just people loved Giphy, right? And having a little bit of fun going through their workday. So I think if you have those simple, easy to use and fun, like that's a really easy way to get in with the end users.
At what point what point did you make that shift from more bottoms up to top down, and kind of where was the product in that sense? Because making a product that is easy to use and engaging and fun is hard, and I imagine you don't really want to step on the go-to-market and the actual sales function until you feel confident in that. So you talked about Net Promoter. Are there benchmarks that you look towards to say this is the point at which we can start selling, or were you kind of pulled by your customers, or what led you to make that kind of shift and change?
Yeah, I think you're naturally going to start to see it and it doesn't have to be a switch in my mind. It's a much easier enterprise sale if you have existing pockets of usage, right? It's just easier because you go into the company, they already know you. They can show, whatever your ROI is, for Slack, we would say, hey, reduced email, reduced meetings, people are communicating more efficiently. You can measure that. And it's really easy to go do a survey to, hey, you already have 1,000 people using it. Let's just ask them, are they seeing these productivity improvements, right? And then you can net out the ROI there. But I think it's getting pushed higher and higher, right? I think Slack early on, we always had sales, but it wasn't the like, hey, here's your quota, you got to go out and land this. It was very much more of like a consultative, helpful, hey, if you have questions. And we would even metric our salespeople on things like CSAT. So after the sale finished, we would interview the or survey the owners and go like, hey, was this person helpful and knowledgeable and courteous? Because, you know, a lot of times I've bought a lot of B2B software and I feel just harassed and like buy it now and buy it now. And, you know, it's not like a very consultative approach. So we wanted to incentivize our sales team to be a little bit more helpful and consultative. So I think like as you start to get up to, you know, 50 million ARR, you know, even, you know, for us, like 100, like really before we started to get really a ton of like top down wall to wall type deals. But I think it keeps getting pushed further along because, you know, again, the old historical model was you would contact sales to learn about the product and to buy it. And now with like product like growth and just people are doing more and more research ahead of time, you know, a lot of times they're coming in with they've already done the research and sometimes they're even ready to buy. And so that need to go through the traditional sales process has been alleviated until you start to get to really like larger enterprises that, again, you have to go through procurement, legal, infosec. I think that's where kind of having a really good sales team is going to make a big difference.
And you know, so we talked the other day, obviously both businesses, ours at Codecademy and yours at Slack beforehand, involved a substantial amount of freemium.
Yeah.
How did it, at Slack, as we talked about, kind of there's a difference between features and compliance and kind of what you're selling in those packages. First, you know, what was the decision to execute on a freemium business model? And kind of where did that come from? Which obviously now is very popular, but has changed over time. So maybe let's start there.
Yeah, I mean, I know you guys got the freemium model as well. I think for a lot of people in the B2C space, it was more common, you know, a way to help introduce users. And in the B2B space, like I've seen an evolution on this, you know, for a long time, there were no free plans. Then people started doing like free trials, which were either usually time bound or user bound. And then, you know, you started to see these instances, and for us at Slack was like a true freemium plan where you could use it for as long as you want and get as many users as you wanted. There were no like time restrictions or other restrictions. And I think, you know, the way I looked at it as a marketer was, you know, a freemium plan is actually a subsidized marketing engine. Because you know, really like for those that have marketed to SMBs and enterprises, what you'll start to see is that the enterprises can pay a lot. SMBs are super price sensitive, right? You know, I remember at Zendesk when we raised the prices just a little bit on SMBs, there were like pitchforks and they were ready to take us down. And we ended up just grandfathering. By the way, if you ever raise your prices on your existing, just grandfather the existing ones. You're always going to get new ones. You'll save a lot of like hate email and tweets towards you. But, you know, I think like, you know, ultimately, for us at Slack, we started off with it. And that's a lot easier because, you know, I'll advise companies now, and once you're further down the road, it's really hard just institutionally. There's a lot of scare about moving to a freemium model, but it so helps out with your growth. As far as pricing and packaging, the other evolution I've seen, which we had kind of talked a little about, was the initial way that people would construct when they do pricing and packaging, they have multiple plans, was very feature driven, right? So you would come in and, hey, if you move to the bronze package, you get these features. Move to the silver package, you get these features. And it was all product features. And what I think helped us at Slack a lot was we shifted away from feature-driven upgrades and more to putting types of things that enterprises had to have. So for instance, procurement, so in that IBM example, right, they might have 17 instances of Slack and procurement's getting 17 bills. They want consolidated billing, right? That's really annoying. They just want one bill. Their security team wants single sign-on. Their IT team wants provisioning and deprovisioning. Their legal team wanted compliance exports in case someone left, right? And there was a lawsuit, they needed to be able to have that. You know, they want things like an SLA, right? They want to have 99.99% uptime. They want a dedicated customer success manager. But we never kind of went down the path of, hey, emoji reactions? Well, sorry, you only get that on the enterprise plan, right? It was this idea of like, give a very full
be on the enterprise plan then, right? No.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, a lot of people come with freemium, and in my ways, it's kind of like crippleware. It's just, it's not that helpful. It's very limited. You know, people are busy too, and a 2-week free trial is like someone tries it out for 15 minutes, and they got to do other stuff. They come back a week and a half later, and I think what happened with us is we said that we noticed that when people experience a lot of value and then are asked to upgrade, you get much, much higher conversions than if you really force it on them too early before they've experienced much value. And so that's how we did it. But I don't know, I'm curious, like for you guys at Codecademy, like what was your thoughts as you kind of went through that and you thought about your different tiers and what ended up working?
Yeah, we've struggled a lot with this over time. I think we, we first started the business, the first 4 years or so, we were just completely free. And then we faced this decision of, great, we have to take this platform that, registers almost 500,000 users a month, that has, tens of millions of registered users, and find a way to convert those to a paying product. And so we ran a lot of tests. We started actually, and the initial thesis was never charge for curriculum, basically charge for features. And so for us, that was, courses are free, but projects, quizzes, paths that show you what you're learning are paid. And that worked for a time. But the biggest thing that we saw is that the core use case for Codecademy was going through curriculum, and our users kept asking for more and more and more. And it cost us more money to create all that curriculum. And so ultimately, over time, we moved to this model where, about 50% of our curriculum is free today, 50% is paid. You can use the product for free forever as a consumer. But there are certain things, if you're looking to take more kind of advanced courseware, et cetera, then you probably will end up paying us. On the enterprise side, we see, we're working now on a lot of pricing that we can dive into at Slack too, because I'm curious for that experience that you have for us. But selling the features of compliance, multi-account management, provisioning, these are the things that people want. And oftentimes our sale is, someone will come into an organization and, we have major clients where the head of the design team will use Codecademy in their personal life and then say, I should bring this into the workforce. I should train my design team on programming. They'll reach out. It'll start with, kind of 10 seats, and they might not need account management or provisioning. But as soon as it expands beyond that one team, they need a way, of keeping their account data secure. They might want single sign-on. And those are the things, that's where kind of we start charging beyond just the price of our standard paid product. Because to your point, those are the things that are unique about a larger deployment that larger enterprises can and should pay for and feel like a natural kind of friction point to give them in order to provide them with a better service overall.
Yeah, makes sense. Totally makes sense.
Yeah. When you guys started, how much work has been done? I imagine a lot from a pricing perspective. I'll start with something that, at least to me as a Slack user, has always felt very generous, which is the only charging you for active seats. I imagine that was a really testy conversation at the time because many SaaS companies make money on on the breakage, right? And it seems like Slack doesn't necessarily do that. So I'm curious kind of where that decision came from and how contentious it was at the time.
Yeah. So the good news, it wasn't contentious at all because we did it right at the beginning. I found if you do it right at the beginning, it's not as hard. I can imagine if I had proposed that to our CFO at Salesforce back in the day, the mind would have exploded with revenue recognition issues and just, how do I do this? Wait, only people that are actually using it. The reason I liked it though was that it aligned us with our customer success, right? And I kind of come from that customer centric camp where it's all about the experience you deliver, and that's why I love NPS and this idea of just providing a lot of value. And so, from our standpoint, daily active users was a big company goal. And to the extent that people were using the product, we were getting paid. And if they stopped using it, we stopped getting paid. And what we actually saw a lot in the early days was that, sometimes people would just go on vacation. So we had a 10-day active window, and, Sally would go on vacation for 2 weeks, bless her heart, never checked it. And then, we would email the admin and be like, hey, looks like Sally's no longer active. We're going to give you a credit back for, usage or stop billing you. And I just think that bought a lot of goodwill too, and I think part of this, this whole bottoms up playbook is, you build goodwill, you build trust, people are actually experiencing value. And it's not this super high risk proposition, because the old way was, God, you have 20,000 users, or you got to sign a 20,000 user contract wall to wall, huge risk, right? Maybe people use it, maybe they don't. Maybe the users like it, maybe they think it sucks, and I feel for a CIO having to go through that process. So I think this model just allows people to experience that value. Now, at the same time, you got to deliver on that value, right? You can't be just all vaporware and it's going to work great. Don't worry about it. I'm going to buy you a steak dinner and golf, right? You got to deliver to the actual user. I remember a funny story at Zendesk. We were going through our NPS results, and at the time we were building a lot of advanced features because we thought that's what they wanted. Yep. And we looked at the number one reason people didn't did not like Zendesk. And at the time they said like, hey, it doesn't load fast, right? Like I'm doing tickets 10 hours a day. I can't wait 3 or 4 seconds between each thing, right? And speed is never a sexy thing, right? If you're in development, you always want to add another feature, right? So, the end user, you have to deliver value. And for them, it's just like, hey, we just want it to go fast, right? Just make it fast and make it so I can do my job.
Yep. And in terms of, changing those pricing and paid plans over time, like what was the balance from a, conversion versus long-term retention? How did you guys run price tests internally, and kind of what was the overlap between marketing and product in that?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. And I've come from the camp, again, like deliver value. And I think when you deliver value, you can charge based off the value you deliver. So if we're kind of even going back to the NPS framework, if you have an NPS of 80 and your competitors have an NPS of like, say, 10, well, you're delivering a lot more value than them, right? And so you can price a lot higher. And Slack, compared to a lot of other options out there, which were basically free or very cheaply priced, like we had a, pretty premium price. And so I do think like, you can do that. I've ran a lot of like demand elasticity tests. We did it at one at Zendesk, where when we were launching our enterprise plan, we split tested at 2 different prices. And this was a really interesting one, right? Because one was about $25 per user higher than the other one for the enterprise package. And what we ended up finding was that the higher price won. So we looked at like the number of people went to the pricing page, when people clicked on it, signed up, became customers. And at the time, what had happened was so many SaaS companies, I think, come up with such a cheap price that these big enterprises will look at it and be like, oh, well, this can't be like an enterprise solution, right? Like I'm used to paying X amount for some crappy old software, and you're paying so much cheaper, right? And so in that case, actually, like a higher price actually made us look a little more legit, or come closer to what some of our competitors were charging. But with all these things, at least my experience has been, hey, you can test these out. Again, like I said earlier, like if you do a price increase, I really advocate like grandfather your existing users in, because a lot of times we grow via word of mouth, and you don't want to piss off like your biggest champions and fans. And so, whatever you're at now, you're going to have 10x more 10 years down the road. Like, don't worry about that 10% population to try to extract as much revenue you can. But anyway, that's what worked with us, and that's how we did some of the testing there.
Yep. And in terms of, obviously the whole kind of logic inherent in land and expand is finding the person who can help you land. Like, how did you evaluate the right person to kind of sell through the right channel? And at what point you were able to move an organization onto Slack? Like, what did that set of metrics look like?
Yeah, for us, so I think just having a end user type format where we would, market to these end users. And once we got a little bit of a pocket going there, what we would try to do is just like tap into that love, like we'd find people that were really love Slack, and you can kind of, again, if you're, sorry, I'm an MPS geek, but if you're surveying the individual users, let's say you've got 1,000 users using it, and you come across, oh, well, there's 10 that rated us a perfect 10, said, oh my God, your software has like changed us, it's transformed the way we work, I love you guys, hey, they're probably a good one to ask, would you mind making an intro for us, right, to the procurement team, or would you mind, being a testimonial for us, or would you mind, speaking on our behalf? Or on the flip side too, you can even kind of supercharge that evangelism, right? Like find those people that love you and then go, hey, would you mind coming into our offices? Would you mind meeting Stuart? Would you, send them a pair of socks, Slack socks, or whatever it is, right? Like this idea of like just kind of tapping into that evangelism and champion. And, for us, like we would see Slack start to grow within a company because it certainly had like a viral component, right? Like the more people you invite to the team, they kind of get to use it. And once we started to see adoption across, for us, it was like the activity and also the amount of users. Then we would start thinking about, all right, well, now does it make sense to consolidate this and do a wall-to-wall type engagement? And that's where I think we would do a little bit more ABM, sales team coming in and kind of coming in from both sides, like the top down and the bottoms up. But for every company, it's going to be a little bit different, but that's kind of how we did it on our side.
I wonder, maybe just to close on, and then we can open up to questions from everyone else. How much did all of this strategy change over time, right? From when you joined Slack when it was 50, now it's a public company, and obviously we've seen similar transitions. Dropbox, a lot of bottoms up in the early days, now a lot of top down. Zendesk, like how quickly did that shift happen, and when, and kind of what percentage of Slack sales or most of these kind of bigger, originally bottoms up driven companies are able to stay bottoms up?
I think, I mean, personally, Slack till this day has a huge bottoms up model, right? And I don't think that needs to change. I think if anything, again, you have these macro trends where people are doing so much more research before they go out and choose a solution, right? So, and people are used to being able to try it out for themselves, ideally in a free environment. And so I don't think that bottoms up model is going to change. I just think it's a much more efficient model of growth than only having like a top-down sales. The problem is, like, I've advised companies that just do top-down sales, and they'll always inevitably come to me and say, hey, like, we have this awareness issue, right? Like, no one knows about us. And that's usually because, like, they've only been selling into enterprises, like they've ignored the SMB segments, they don't have a free plan. So it's a very small number of actual people that even use the platform, right? And the bottoms up model just encourages virality, encourages a lot of SMB people to use you. And in a weird way too, I'd even go on with that and say, like, we were fine with people not paying for Slack because they're still out there talking about it and recommending it. And maybe they work for an SMB that can't afford it, but then all of a sudden they switch jobs. Now they're working for an enterprise and they bring that tech in with them, right? Like, we've all, if you look at all our LinkedIn careers, we've probably all kind of bounced around a little bit from enterprise, SMB, and across the road there. So, I think, like, again, it's going to shift. I think it's getting a little bit later where you have like you add that outbound in because people can do research earlier. You still need it. I don't ascribe to like 100% like Atlassian side where you just never do any type of human contact. I just think people have questions at some point. But, I think it's being pushed later and later, and for us, we got to, I think, 200 million in ARR in just a couple of years. And that was really fast. And that was with predominantly a bottoms up model. So I think that metric is getting pushed further down the road.
Awesome. So with that, I want to open it up to Q&A. I think we're going to take questions if anyone has them over chat. I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions. And if not, I'll just keep asking you questions.
There we go. We got one.
Our first. We have a software in beta testing mode. Do you get your first users on it for free or charge them to try it? What are some tips to get your first customers?
I would say start free, right? You're not in a position to be like right off the bat to be charging huge amounts. I think you want to reduce friction, increase time to value. So I would say, especially those early users, like, have a free plan, right? Let them get it and then tap into them, because you're going to need the next customers go, well, I need a reference or someone, right? Well, hey, you've got your first customer here. You can do it the other way. And again, like, there's a lot of companies have been built the old model where you charge a pretty punny, you do A's from the get-go. I would just say that I think that's it's just a more expensive way to do it, to scale out. And I think freemium is really powerful. It's one of those growth accelerators for a company to get out there. The other thing too is, if you don't do freemium and you just skip SMB and you go straight to enterprise, what ends up happening, you kind of open yourself up. You open yourself for some competitor to come in, and wherever you have success, the VCs are going to invest another 10 copycats, right? And you open up this wedge for people to get into the SMB space, and there's a ton of SMBs. And then they slowly move up market, and you keep getting pushed further and further out, until eventually you kind of, just die. So that's why I like, go freemium and tackle that SMB market and get as much penetration as you can.
Awesome. Any other open questions from folks?
Great question.
Yeah, I think just maybe I'll chime in on that one as well. I think for us, I do think to Bill's point that starting with with free was super helpful in getting that initial base of users. But then I found that talking to them and asking what they'd be willing to pay for was really the thing that changed for us. And I think in retrospect, Codecademy was free for about 4 years. We were looking to raise a bunch of money from venture investors and kind of grow from a scale perspective. But I wish we'd monetized sooner, and I wish we'd asked folks, what are you willing to pay for, and how much are you willing to pay for it? And kind of made that pivot, because there is a certain something about free users value the product differently than paid users do. And if they're paying you, their standards are higher, and it makes your business perform at a higher level.
Yeah.
So I think there's merit in both. Looks like we have 2 more quick questions. First, the biggest bottoms up growth mistake you made, Bill?
I already mentioned it. Charging existing users a higher amount. Grandfather them.
Yep. Awesome. And the last one, and then we'll close it out. Any hot takes on companies that have built top down for 10 years now, looking at trying freemium for all the reasons that you've mentioned?
It's going to be incredibly difficult. I empathize and sympathize with you because it is such an ingrained culture, and moving to freemium is a totally different set of DNA. So I would, if possible, bring in that DNA to help guide you through that process. Really think about pricing and packaging. You know, what is free? What are the next tiers? How are you going to price it? But going with the conviction that, at least in my experience, doing 20 years, I've always done freemium across B2C, B2B. It works. So you just got to kind of believe in it, get support from the board, the exec team, and the actual people that are implementing it.
Awesome. Cool. Well, it has been a pleasure chatting with you, Bill.
Yeah,
And
likewise.
thanks, Bowery folks, for having us.
Yeah, thank
Great.
you
Yeah,
so much.
awesome. Thank you so much, Bill and Zach. We really appreciate both of you being here with us today and teaching us more about bottoms-up marketing. That was really great.